If I could whisper just one principle into a trader's ear before they ever place a trade, it would be this: let the market prove it, then make it pay. I didn't understand how radical that sentence was until I watched my own account cycle through triumph and humiliation. Like most operators, I started out with the wrong hero, myself. I thought the job was to be clever, early, and right. Jesse Livermore learned, at a far higher tuition than mine, that the job is none of those things. The job is to be aligned. And alignment begins with a single principle that turned him from a gifted tape reader into a legend: proof before conviction. He would not let belief spend his capital. He made evidence do it. When I first studied Livermore beyond the poster, quotes, I found a man who rebuilt his entire craft around that pivot. It changed everything. His entries became scouts, tiny probes whose purpose was information, not income. His ads were never emotional. They were paid by progress, size unlocked only after the tape advanced the thesis. His stops migrated from pain thresholds to disproof points, places where the idea itself died. He paired price with time. If momentum should show and doesn't within the window, out. Hostage trades weren't courageous to him. They were corrosion. That one principle also rewired his patience. Sitting tight stopped being passive. It became the natural consequence of correct proof. Livermore could hold big winners because he had already proved he could take small losses. He replaced the drama of prediction with the choreography of sequence: conditions, confirmation, commitment, continuation, cut. The more I practiced it, the quieter my trading felt, and the larger my best campaigns became. Boredom, I learned, is what consistency looks like from the inside. Modern traders think an edge lives in indicators, APIs, or speed. Livermore would smile. He'd say edge lives in order, in refusing to let urgency masquerade as opportunity. Proof before conviction makes the desk feel almost inevitable. When the market confirms, I don't feel brave. I feel obligated. When it contradicts, I'm gone, small, quick, and shameless about being wrong. That is the mental posture that kept him solvent through panics and exuberance alike. Here's the path we'll walk. I'll take you inside the inner conflict this principle solves, the traps it disarms, the way Livermore framed it in his own rules, and the real trades, mine and his, where it separated professionals from participants. We'll translate it to today's screens with risk numbers, scaling triggers, correlation caps, and a daily loss circuit breaker that protects cognition before capital. By the end, this won't be a slogan. It will be a habit your future self thanks you for. Be honest. What costs you more, acting before proof or refusing to exit after disproof? Drop your answer below. I'll tailor a fix for the top 2 replies in the next sections. The inner conflict or market paradox. The moment I commit to proof before conviction, an old tension wakes up inside me. One part of me loves the principle because it lowers pressure. I don't have to be a prophet. I only have to be patient. The other part hates it because it denies me my favorite illusion, that I can bend the market with courage. This is the paradox that shadowed Livermore through every cycle, the appetite to act versus the obligation to wait. He didn't resolve it by becoming emotionless. He resolved it by assigning each emotion a job. Ambition. He kept it, but on a leash. Ambition's job was to press only after proof. Caution. He kept that too, but not as paralysis. Caution's job was to defend until proof. When those roles swap, the account writes a sermon in red ink. I've seen it in myself. A clean principle at 8:30 a.m. becomes a creative interpretation at 1:15 p.m. If I'm having a need-to-win day, I treat the first uptick as confirmation and the first downtick as injustice. The principle is simple. The problem is time dilation. Minutes of boredom feel like hours of danger, and I feel compelled to manufacture evidence the tape won't give me. Livermore's answer was to move this conflict out of feelings and into sequence. He forced both selves, ambition and caution, to obey the same order of operations: conditions, confirmation, commitment, continuation, cut. Conditions come first. Is the tape forgiving, neutral, or ruthless? In forgiving tapes, small errors survive. In ruthless tapes, even good ideas die. That single label decides attempt count, size, and the height of the confirmation bar. It's amazing how many bad decisions evaporate when the environment downgrades your permissions before the open. Then confirmation. Not a single tick. But behavior, a reclaim and hold of a real level, a pullback that breathes instead of bleeds, a range shift with participation. Only then does commitment arrive, and even that starts as a scout, small enough to be information. If the market sponsors me, continuation earns ads from profits. If sponsorship disappears, the cut is mechanical at disproof or time. The sequence. is rude to my ego because it prevents the two most gratifying lies in trading. I was early, not wrong, and I'll just give it a little room. Correlation adds a sneaky layer to the paradox. Ambition wants activity, so I open 5 positions that rhyme, convincing myself I'm diversified. Caution whispers, one bet in a trench coat. Livermore diversified by character, not by symbol. Leaders versus laggards. Momentum versus mean reversion. Cyclical versus defensive. That's how you keep a single macro shove from bulldozing your whole attempt to act responsibly. And there's the cognitive fuse, the daily loss limit. Ambition calls it a leash. Caution calls it oxygen. Livermore left the room when he hit his number. I closed the platform at 2R because, past that point, my brain wants redemption more than information. Proof before conviction dies, the second redemption takes the wheel. This is why the principle creates calm only when it's paired with choreography. Without the sequence, I'll keep mistaking urgency for opportunity. With it, the paradox softens. Ambition accelerates only after the road is paved. Caution drives until then. That's how Livermore kept his identity from hijacking his method, and that's how I keep the promise I made in the last section. Where does your inner conflict blow up most? Waiting for confirmation, respecting time stops, or capping the day at 2R? Tell me below and I'll address the top pain point directly in the next section. Coming out of that paradox, ambition tugging one way, caution tugging the other, I notice the first failure never shows up on a chart. It shows up in my language. I begin to rename things. Wait for confirmation quietly becomes, this looks good enough. Cut at disproof becomes, give it room. Scout first becomes, why not start a little bigger? None of those edits are technical. They're emotional. Jesse Livermore warned that a trader's ruin begins when vocabulary starts doing the heavy lifting that proof should do. The mind is clever at forging counterfeit evidence. A single uptick near my level gets promoted to sponsorship. A pause gets promoted to absorption. What I'm really doing is easing the discomfort of uncertainty. That's the first trap, manufactured confirmation, seeing what I want to feel rather than what the tape is actually saying. Livermore solved this by defining confirmation as behavioral sequences instead of single moments. Reclaim and hold, pull back and sponsor, push and participate. If one link is missing, the chain is missing. The second trap is time distortion. After a few minutes of nothing, boredom dresses up as urgency. I forget that my plan includes a time stop for precisely this reason, to protect mental capital from hostage trades. The longer I sit inside a trade that refuses to progress, the more I narrate. I tell myself it's coiling, when in truth it's declining to confirm. Livermore paired every price stop with a time stop, so he didn't let patience turn into denial. Then there's the classic, averaging down. It feels like math, but it's really identity management. I'm not improving my basis, I'm trying to buy back the right to be right. Under proof before conviction, this becomes obviously illogical. If conviction must trail proof, adding after disproof is contradiction. Livermore called averaging down the quicksand of hope. Each additional unit lowers my mobility until I can't execute the only action that saves me. Leaving. A sibling to averaging down is the narrative stop, moving a stop to where it hurts less rather than where the idea dies. The true kill switch for a thesis is structural, break of the higher low, failure of the reclaim, or temporal, the window where momentum should appear has closed. When I accept that, a stop becomes an agreement with reality instead of a negotiation with discomfort. Another trap wears a responsible mask, diversifying into clones. I open 4 positions across names that rhyme and convince myself I'm spreading risk. In factor-driven markets, that's one bet in a different jacket. Livermore diversified by character, leader versus laggard, momentum versus mean reversion, cyclical versus defensive. So a single macro shove couldn't bulldoze his day. Finally, there's method drift. A handful of small losses, and I'm tempted to edit the system mid-flight. New indicator, new time frame, new instrument. Pain screams, fix it now. Livermore's notebook answer was procedural. Finish a fixed trial count of fully qualified trades before evaluating changes. That keeps variance from masquerading as failure and boredom from masquerading as innovation. When I list these traps, manufactured confirmation, time distortion, averaging down, narrative stops, correlation blindness, method drift, I'm really listing one core problem. I want relief more than truth. Proof before conviction is designed to insult that impulse. It replaces relief with rules. Scout first, adds only from progress, stops at disproof and time, cap the day to protect cognition. Count factor exposure, not tickers. Review process separately from P&L. The result isn't perfection. It's a posture that makes bad days survivable and good days scalable. From here, it helps to step out of my head and into Livermore's, how he framed these traps before the language of factors and ATR, and how his definitions of cache, confirmation, and control still map exactly onto a modern screen. Livermore's perspective on the situation stepping out of my own traps, I lean on the way Jesse Livermore framed the same problems long before we had our modern vocabulary. He treated markets as a theater of organized emotion, and himself as an operator with a limited supply of clarity. That framing sounds poetic until you see how brutally practical it is. He assumed two things at the open. First, that human nature will not change today. Second, that his own nature will try to change the rules once heat shows up. So he wrote rules that act before heat arrives. He started with cache as a position, not a pause, not shame, optionality. Cache bought him three essentials: time to observe without bias, the ability to act with size when proof appeared, and the emotional distance to refuse borderline trades. Most traders treat flat as failure. He treated it as inventory. This single stance dissolved half the traps I named in the last section, because boredom could no longer bully him into activity. Next came conditions before conclusions. He didn't let a single seductive chart overrule the character of the general market. In his notes, he effectively tagged the tape as forgiving, neutral, or ruthless. Forgiving. Small errors survive. Breakouts get sponsorship. Leaders lead. Ruthless. Even good ideas die on contact. From that tag flowed his permissions: attempt count, size, and the height of the confirmation bar. The trap of manufactured confirmation loses power when the environment has already raised or lowered your bar for proof. Then confirmation itself. He was allergic to single-tick evidence. The tape had to perform a sequence, reclaim a level, and hold. Pull back and find sponsorship. Push with participation. He allowed a scout to test, but the job of the scout was information, not income. Only when the tape advanced the thesis did he add, and then only from profits. That turned greed into a scaling policy instead of a personality trait, and it made averaging down logically impossible. If conviction trails proof, adding after disproof is nonsense. His stops were contracts with reality. They lived at disproof, not discomfort, beneath a reclaimed level that must act as support, below the most recent higher low that defines structure, or at the time boundary beyond which a valid move should have revealed itself. This last piece, time, was his antidote to hostage trades. If the market owed momentum and paid silence, the idea was stale. He flattened without speeches. Losing small was tuition. Lingering stale was corrosion. Livermore also respected correlation before the term was fashionable. He knew 5 tickers could be one bet in disguise. He diversified by character: leader versus laggard, momentum versus mean reversion, cyclical versus defensive, so a single emotional wave in the tape couldn't bulldoze his day. That awareness kept him from the false safety of busy portfolios that were secretly one exposure. Finally, he protected the instrument he traded with first: his mind. A daily loss limit wasn't weakness, it was maintenance. When he hit it, he left the room. He understood that after a certain threshold, the brain seeks redemption, not information. No principle survives that state for long. By stepping away, he preserved the clarity that lets all the other rules work tomorrow. Viewed together, his lens converts psychology into choreography. Cash buys patience. Conditions gate aggression. Confirmation unlocks size. Stops end arguments. Time stops end hostage crises. Correlation keeps single waves from capsizing the boat. A daily loss limit protects the pilot. The elegance isn't in any one line, it's in how each line prevents the next trap from forming. That's why the principle we opened with, proof before conviction, wasn't a slogan to him. It was the hinge that made every other rule swing smoothly. Translating Livermore's lens into the screen in front of me, I picked a single name, call it Northwick, a liquid leader inside a group that had started to separate from the index. I refused to let enthusiasm carry me into a basket of lookalikes. 5 names would only disguise one bet. From the opening bell, I treated cash as inventory, and spent the first 30 minutes on conditions. Breadth slightly positive. Volatility cooling versus the 20-day, sector ETF stair-stepping, leadership intact. I tagged the tape neutral to forgiving, which meant normal attempt count standard confirmation bar, and no need to force creativity. The level that mattered was last week's high, a spot Northwick had peaked above and surrendered 2 sessions prior. If the stock could reclaim and hold that line on real participation, the sequence would start. I wrote the plan in the journal before touching an order. Scout only on reclaim and hold. Disproof lives just beneath the reclaimed line plus a small range cushion. Time stop at 90 minutes if momentum fails to appear. Ads allowed only from profits on range shift or retest and go. Trail under structure. No letting a winner turn into a teacher. When price pushed into the level, I waited. One uptick is not proof. One candle is not sponsorship. It reclaimed, hesitated, dipped a few ticks below, and snapped back with bids stepping up, exactly the hold I wanted. I put on the scout so small my old ego would have called it unserious. The point wasn't income. It was information. 10 minutes later, the pullback came. Orderly, spreads tight, selling unconvincing, and the higher low printed above the reclaimed line. Volume expanded on the push. That unlocked Unit NR2, funded by unrealized gains from the scout. The market was paying for my aggression. My feelings were not. I checked correlation before touching size again. Two peers confirmed with similar character, the factor ETF behaved, and the index internals leaned supportive. If that wave turned, I'd cut the basket, not pretend the single line was independent. Midday brought the usual test: drift, silence, temptation to narrate. This is where hostage trades used to grow. The time window kept me honest. At 70 minutes, Northwick printed an inside bar, then expanded with a clean range shift. That advance, proof renewed, paid for unit number 3. I scaled a third into strength at the first measured extension, lifted the stop on the remainder beneath the intraday structure that defined the thesis, and let it breathe. Late afternoon, the tape threw a feint, fast fade back into the line. My old habit would have called it a shakeout and widened the leash. The journal called it a retest, and the plan required a hold. Volume dried into the level, buyers stepped and the stock lifted. The trail stayed where the idea would die, not where discomfort would ease. Into the close, I bled some size to bank the campaign and left a runner with a structure stop. No speeches, no heroics, just choreography. The next morning, a gap down kissed the trail and took the remainder out for a respectable exit. I didn't feel cheated. The campaign hadn't ended because I lost nerve. It ended because the information that sponsored it expired. I opened the journal and scored the process, not the P&L. Conditions tagged, confirmation respected, ads paid by progress, correlation policed, time honored, stops at disproof, no round trip. The line at the bottom read the same as always: proof before conviction. From there, the story naturally bends toward the moment every trader faces sooner or later. The day the rhythm falters, small rule breaks multiply, and you realize the next thing that must be rebuilt is not capital, but cognition, emotional low point or turning point. The first cracks in the Northwick campaign didn't come from price. They came from my posture the next day. Success has a way of loosening screws I swore were tight. I caught myself opening the platform a little earlier, skimming the checklist faster, telling myself I already knew the tape because yesterday had felt musical. That's the kind of confidence that doesn't announce itself. It accretes. By the third session, I was making micro-edits to language that had kept me safe. The time window became flexible, the disproof level became contextual, and a scout started to look suspiciously like a statement. Nothing blew up. That was the problem. Erosion never rings a bell. The market shifted from neutral to forgiving into a choppier mood: rotation, failed continuation, leadership thinning. My pre-open regime tag should have downgraded permissions: fewer attempts, higher confirmation bar, default half size. Instead, I told myself I could work through it because the read had been right all week. I took a clean first loss, textbook disproof, no debate. The second loss landed heavier than it should have, not in the account but in the narrative. I felt the urge to make a point rather than collect information. When a third setup appeared, I could feel my breath shorten. I wasn't reading. I was remembering. I entered a scout that was mathematically small and psychologically loud. The tape answered with indifference. Pullback bled, sponsorship didn't show, and the time window ticked toward expiry. This is where my old self would have started storycraft. Shakeout before the run, market makers' fishing stops, room to breathe. I watched my hand hover above the mouse to nudge the stop, just a little lower, and that image was the alarm I needed. I closed the position on schedule at disproof inside the time window and sat back. The loss was modest. The save was massive. I had intercepted the exact reflex that turns a quiet red day into a personal sermon delivered by a margin call. I triggered the step-away protocol I wrote for myself when calm. At 2R, or at 2 rule-compliant losses plus 1 near miss of a rule, the platform goes dark and the journal opens. I walked, drank water, and returned to a page with 2 columns I've come to respect: what the tape proved today, and what I assumed without proof. The left side was short and clear: failed follow-through, stubborn supply at obvious levels, participation thinning. The right side was longer and familiar, due for a reclaim, typical shakeout, leaders won't break trend. I had been trading yesterday's character with today's money. The turn wasn't a motivational speech. It was a contractual reset. I rewrote the day's permissions in ink. Regime tagged ruthless until proven otherwise. Attempts capped at 3 with a bias to observation. Recovery size at half unit until 10 fully qualified trades restore rhythm. Ads only from realized or locked-in unrealized gains. Correlation budget tightened to protect against the single wave that erases careful work. I also recentered the metronome that kept Northwick clean. Proof unlock size. Time defines validity. Stop sit where the idea dies, not where anxiety ebbs. By the close, nothing about the P&L would impress anyone. Everything about the process would. I had felt the slide begin and refused it. That refusal, quiet, unglamorous, repeatable, is the hinge of every comeback. From here, the principle that carried Livermore through panics comes back into sharp focus. The rule that turns restraint into power and converts a string of small, honest losses into the right to press when the tape sponsors you again. Coming out of that reset, the one rule that steadied my hands was the same one that stabilized Livermore after his worst stretches: proof before conviction. I had flirted with it before. Now I rebuilt the desk around it so thoroughly that breaking it would require breaking several other things first. I wanted the rule to be more than a sentence. I wanted it to be a sequence that carried me when adrenaline tried to drive. The first change was architectural. Every idea starts as a scout that asks a yes-no question. Will the market sponsor this? Sponsorship has a shape, not a slogan. Reclaim and hold a real level. Pull back and find sponsorship. Push with participation. If the chain is incomplete, conviction has nothing to follow. That clarity makes averaging down logically impossible. If conviction trail only follows proof, adding after disproof is not courage. It's contradiction. The scout dies cheaply and I record what I learned, not what I felt. The second change was the double stop, price and time. Price stop sits at disproof, the place where the idea is invalid, structure break, failed reclaim, or loss of the pivot that defines the thesis. Time stop guards mental capital. If momentum should reveal itself within a declared window and doesn't, I'm flat. This killed hostage trades that slowly harvested confidence while pretending to be patient. When I enforced time, the room got quieter, my logs got cleaner, and my best campaigns extended because my mind trusted my exits. Third, I hardwired a paid ad policy. Ads unlock only when the prior unit's unrealized profits can finance the additional risk and fresh proof appears. Range shift, leadership confirmation, or sponsored retest and go. This turned aggression into math rather than mood. I didn't deserve size. The market funded it. Paradoxically, that made my big winners bigger because each unit arrived only after the tape proved it could carry weight. Fourth, I reframed cash as an active position. Flat isn't empty. It's optionality. Under proof before conviction, most hours are observation hours by design. The need to do something stopped feeling like diligence and started looking exactly like what it is: leakage. On neutral or ruthless days, the sequence authorizes fewer attempts and demands higher proof. I get to the bell with dry powder and a stable head, which is why I can actually press when the tape finally pays. Fifth, I counted exposure by character, not by ticker. 5 names on one factor are 1 proof, not 5. The rule demanded I keep a correlation budget, total open risk per theme, and when the index shoved, I reduced the basket as a unit. This prevented a righteous idea from being multiplied into reckless exposure. Finally, I protected the rule with a cognitive circuit breaker. At 2R on the day, the platform refuses new risk. Past that number, emotion wants redemption more than information. No principle survives that state for long. The breaker ensures tomorrow's operator is intact, which is the only way today's small losses convert into tomorrow's large holds. As these pieces snapped together, something subtle shifted. Holding winners became simple because exiting losers became automatic. The same principle that trimmed my worst days unlocked my best ones. I didn't feel heroic pressing. I felt obligated. Proof had already hired conviction. And when proof withdrew its sponsorship, exits were no longer a negotiation with pride. They were the last step in choreography I had agreed to while calm. From here, applying the rule to a modern desk becomes straightforward. The tools change, brokers, dashboards, alerts, but the enforcement is identical. Regime tags that gate frequency, automation for time stops and loss limits, factor dashboards for correlation, and a journal that separates what the tape proved from what I merely assumed. That translation is where the principle stops being philosophy and turns into buttons, brackets, and behavior you can run every day. How it applies to modern traders. Translating that scaffold into today's tools means I don't rely on willpower. I let the platform express the principle for me. Before the bell, I tag the regime because proof has different costs in different tapes. I run 4 quick checks: index breadth, realized versus 20-day ATR, leadership persistence, and factor correlation. If breadth is thin, ATR elevated, leaders rotating, and factors glued together, I label it ruthless. That one word instantly lowers my permissions. Fewer attempts, higher bar for confirmation, default half size, and a bias toward observation. In a forgiving tape, broad leadership, orderly volatility, sponsored breakouts, the bar lowers a notch and I allow more trials. The label decides how much proof I require before conviction is even allowed to speak. My orders encode the scout, paid ad policy. The first ticket is a bracketed probe with a stop at disproof and a timer that enforces the time stop. If the reclaim and hold breathes correctly, if the pullback finds sponsorship, if the push shows participation, the platform unlocks unit number 2 because the unrealized on the scout covers the added risk. I can't add from mood. I can only add from market-funded progress. A second range shift or leadership confirmation unlocks unit number 3. Suddenly pressing isn't bravado, it's the arithmetic consequence of evidence. I used to lose the most confidence in hostage trades, ideas that didn't violate price but quietly violated tempo. Now, the time stop flattens them without ceremony. I set the window relative to structure and regime. Momentum continuations might get 20-40 minutes. Slower swing structures get sessions, not days. When the clock closes without behavior, I'm out. The exit log reads calm because the decision was made before the discomfort arrived. Correlation lives on a dashboard, not in my head. I map exposure by character, sector, beta, theme, factor, so 5 similar names can't pretend to be diversification. A simple rule caps open risk per factor, for example, R3R. When the index shoves, I trim the basket as a unit because the risk arrives as a wave. That single habit stopped responsible activity from turning into hidden leverage. Cognition gets the same respect as capital. The 2R daily loss limit is broker enforced. Hit it, and the platform refuses new risk. Past that threshold, my brain wants redemption more than information, and proof before conviction dies quickly under the weight of urgency. The circuit breaker ensures I show up tomorrow with a steady operator, which is the only way a string of small, honest losses converts into the right to hold a large, sponsored winner. Review is the glue. I keep a 2-column page after each session. What the tape proved versus what I assumed without proof. I score process 0 to 5 beside P&L and color code rule infractions. A green day with low process is a yellow flag. A red day with high process is tuition. Every 30 qualified trades, no cherry picking, I run a parameter check. If the distribution of outcomes shifted with regime, I adjust thresholds. If not, I leave the machine alone. That ritual strangles method drift before it starts. All of this makes the principle feel ordinary in the best way. The desk stops being a stage for my certainty and becomes a factory for my behaviors. Proof arrives, conviction follows, size gets paid for, and exits obey contracts with reality in both price and time. On the rare days when a campaign deserves me, I feel no adrenaline, just obligation, the sequence already decided. On the common days when nothing deserves me, cash feels like inventory, not absence. That's how the single principle that made Livermore a legend fits inside a modern terminal and produces the same quiet advantage. Fewer dramatic errors, larger sponsored holds, and a nervous system that survives long enough to meet the next obvious move. Carrying the same architecture into a daily routine means I remove improvisation and let the sequence do the talking. I keep it on one sheet so I can run it even on my worst day. Churn regime tag, 5 minutes pre-open. I label the tape forgiving, cost, neutral, cost, ruthless from 4 readings: index breadth, realized ATR versus 20-day, leadership persistence, and factor correlation. The label sets permissions, attempt count, default size, and the height of the confirmation bar. Forgiving, 4-5 attempts allowed, normal size. Neutral, 3-4 attempts, slightly higher proof. Ruthless, the 3 attempts, half size by default, observation bias. Risk budget and circuit breakers. Per trade risk, per 0.2505% of equity, 1R. Daily loss limit, or 2R, broker enforced. Weekly draw cap, cash, 6R. If hit, I trade half size until I record 10 fully qualified trades with no rule breaks. This protects cognition before capital. Write the setup card, not from memory. For each strategy, I pre-write entry behavior, disproof level, time window, and add criteria. Example, reclaim continuation. Entry, reclaim and hold of prior high plus sponsored pullback. Disproof below reclaimed level plus volatility cushion or below last higher low. Time stop. If no fresh high within N bars, minutes flatten. Add on range shift or retest and go with participation. Scout, paid ad policy. The first unit is a scout whose job is information, not income. If behavior confirms hold higher low participation, I unlock unit number 2, financed by unrealized gains. A second advance, range shift leadership confirmation, unlocks unit number 3. No ads from mood, only from market-funded progress. 5. Stops that measure information, not pain. Price stop sits where the idea dies. Structure break, failed reclaim. Time stop ends hostage trades. If the window closes without behavior, I'm flat, no speeches. Winners are not allowed to become teachers. If a campaign gives back the entire paid move, I reduce without narrative. 6. Correlation budget, hidden leverage control. I cap open risk per factor theme, chart 3R. 5 similar names count as one bet. If the index shoves, I trim the basket as a unit. Risk arrives as a wave, not a raindrop. 7. Attempt counter and drift guardrails. I pre-commit the day's attempts by regime. Exceeding the cap ends new risk. System tweaks occur only after 30 fully qualified trades in the same regime. Variance is not a mandate to edit. 8. Holden scale choreography. Partial at +2R or first measured extension. Trail under structure that defines the thesis. Ads only on fresh proof. No make-back ads. End of day. If a runner survives, stop migrates to the last meaningful swing. Post-trade audit, 10 minutes. 2 columns, what the tape proved versus what I assumed without proof. Score process 0 to 5, separate from P&L. Color code infractions, a sloppy green day is a warning. A clean red day is tuition. 10, reset ritual. Hit 2R or catch myself narrating? Screens off, walk, water, breathwork, journal. Recovery trades default to half size until rhythm returns. Run this page in order and the principle becomes muscle memory. Proof hires conviction, size gets paid for, exits obey contracts with reality in both price and time. The final piece is identity. How to close the film with a posture you can carry into tomorrow so the room stays quiet and the craft stays repeatable. Which single line from this checklist will you tape to your monitor today? Time stop, paid ad, or factor caps, or 3R? Tell me and I'll compress it into a one-liner you can keep. Cinematic conclusion plus emotional sign-off. I close the checklist and the room gets quiet in the right way. The page in front of me isn't theory anymore. It's muscle memory written down so I can pick it up again tomorrow. Proof hires conviction. Size gets paid for. Exits obey contracts with reality in both price and time. If nothing meets that standard, cash is not an apology, it's inventory. That single posture is the difference between an account that survives long enough to meet opportunity and an account that keeps auditioning its pain. I've learned that the market doesn't crown legends for being early or loud. It rewards the operator who is still here when clarity finally arrives. The checklist from the last section isn't there to make me smaller. It's there to make me scalable when the tape sponsors me. Regime tags throttle frequency before I can turn boredom into churn. The scout keeps my first question cheap. The paid ad rule converts appetite into arithmetic. Time stops protect my mind from hostage trades. Factor caps keep 5 lookalikes from pretending to be diversification. The 2R circuit breaker makes sure I don't ask a trade to fix a feeling. None of this is dramatic. That's why it works. What changes most living this way is not the chart, it's the tone of my decisions. Entries feel quiet because the sequence already argued on my behalf. Ads feel inevitable because proof has advanced the thesis. Exits feel clean because I wrote their terms while calm. On the days the tape deserves me, I don't feel brave pressing. I feel obligated, almost administrative. Evidence has paid the invoice and I'm just sending the next order. On the days it doesn't, I'm flat with intent. I don't measure myself by activity. I measure myself by alignment. This is the one principle that turned Livermore into a legend, because it turned chaos into choreography. He didn't try to conquer markets. He learned to read them and to let reading dictate risk. Proof before conviction sounds like restraint until you see what it permits. Extended holds without adrenaline. Pyramids that stand because each block was funded by the block beneath it, and a mind that shows up tomorrow unfrazzled and solvent. It's not a slogan to tape on a monitor. It's the spine that holds the craft upright when the room gets hot. So I end the day the same way I want to begin the next. I mark the regime I traded. I score process beside P&L. I copy one line into tomorrow's plan. Proof before conviction. Then I shut the screens off before they can talk me into a stray impulse, and I let the room go still. The market will write a new script in the morning. I don't need to guess the ending. I just need to arrive with rules that make my best behavior the path of least resistance, so that when proof finally knocks, conviction has no choice but to follow.